My dad's a nuclear consultant and helped develop nuclear submarines and is an engineer by trade. And his attitude is you can't make a living in art, and yet you know, he set us up to do the Foundry work. You know, we all just kind of got into the arts, and you know, Paul kind of led the way with a successful career as a jazz trio sculptor in bronze, and we're looking for a foundry. So my parents gave us the opportunity to cast his work, so we trained under him, and then Foundry started out to do other people's work, and then it kind of evolved where we do our own work, and now work with about 20 galleries. And then after doing it for about 30 years, we wanted to open up the location here in Fredericksburg. You know, I'd seen some works that my brother Paul had been getting done at another foundry, and then it kind of came up that his foundry guy retired, and he was looking for somebody to cast his work, and my parents said, well, why don't you guys cast your older brother Paul's work and make a living doing that? And I was like, okay, well, what's a foundry? So we got an 8-hour lecture from his retiring foundry. Told pretty much go figure it out. We started the foundry up in Northern Virginia because that's where we were living. And then after we did it for a year, we actually started out in a bay in a garage with, you know, we had somebody making, you know, balsa wood airplanes on one side of us. And we would almost burn the place down and be full of smoke. So my parents had a beach house here towards Colonial Beach, and would come through Fredericksburg all the time. And it just turned out that my older brother owned the Farmer's Creamery building, and it was vacant. And we said, man, that would be just a perfect foundry. He goes, well, you want it, you can have it. So we bought the Farmer's Creamery building, been there for 30 years, and just to run the foundry from there. I sculpt using different materials. In sculpting a bronze, the smaller the piece, the harder the material you can use to sculpt with. So you might use Sculpey to do a small crab or a fish, and then as you do larger pieces like a life-size dolphin, I need a softer material that I can work with. So I'll do an armature and then cover it with plaster, and then go over that with plasticine. So there's a lot of variations in what you actually use to sculpt. And then with the casting process, you take your original sculpture, which is what Steve and I work on together, and then after it's sculpted, you divide it up into pieces and make rubber molds that allow me to get a wax duplicate of whatever it is we've sculpted. And then through the casting process, which is lost wax, I need a wax duplicate. So the rubber mold, it gives me an exact duplicate of whatever I've sculpted. And then I might have several molds for one sculpture that is then, after I get a wax and then you put this wax plumbing system on the wax, which is also made out of wax, and you invest that in a plaster, then it's baked out at 1,000 degrees. And then after the bronze is poured into the ceramic mold, the plaster is chipped off of it, and I have a fire scale bronze. Well, I might have a pile of 20 fish that are all cast separately, and then I have a reef base that I have, and then we'll start to put all these pieces together. You actually weld them together after all the metal work has been done to each individual piece. So the coral reefs and such, a lot of them are pieces where it's, you know, several pieces are built up to create one sculpture. And I like that because that's what gives you the flow. Having the foundry, it's been kind of fortunate for me to be able to sit down and try and experiment with a certain patina or color, and then put it on the piece, and if you don't like it, I can go sandblast it and redo it. But it's a process where you use chemicals which are water soluble, and they're applied with mister bottles or sponges or paint brushes onto the surface with heat. And as they heat up on the surface, they oxidize and create a color on the surface. And then after that color has been applied, then we spray an acrylic finish and then a wax over that to kind of protect the finish. Rubber molds with a plaster backing, and as long as they're kind of stored in a semi-good condition, you know, not wet and everything else, then they last. And you know, you have to have a whole building just to store them, because every sculpture you do, there's a rubber mold vault somewhere. The largest piece we ever did was a bald eagle for like Bell Communications, and I have to smile a little bit because you can't estimate how many pieces you're going to have to cast it in. We cast in 125 pounds of bronze per pour in metal, so we're dealing with an area that might be 3 feet by 3 feet. Well, this bald eagle had wing that the top was cast, the bottom was cast, the body, and it was on like a 6-foot tall mountain, and we actually cast that in 83 different pieces. The Foundry, as far as working with other artists and things, we've done like Francis Scott Key for Key Bridge in Georgetown. We've done work for the Air and Space Museum. We did Scoop Jackson, a big bust of him, who was a senator from Washington State, and is in the Capitol building. Then we did, and I won't get too political, Ronald Reagan for the Republican National Headquarters, and that was a large bust. And then it was funny, Steve and I also did a sculpture for the CIA, which we were real proud of, but it won't get a whole lot of play. We did a big globe, and a person pushing this globe with a lever for the CIA museum, and a smaller version went to all of the scientists that come up with all the James Bond's gadgets. So we went to the CIA building, and with George Tenet, who was the director at the time, up on stage. The Declaration of Independence was framed in the National Archives, but they didn't put it, they put it under glass, but they didn't put it under bulletproof glass. And somebody came in with a hammer and hit the glass and almost destroyed it. Well, this is a document that goes, underground in the evenings in a vault. It's, protected with humidity and everything else, and here somebody comes along with a hammer and breaks glass. So like DuPont glass or Corning or something like that donated this bulletproof glass to replace the glass that was covering this document, and then the Foundry had the frame that was actually enclosed in it was bronze, and we had to refit the frame to take care of the glass being thicker. It's a flow because the work takes anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to cast. So I'll and Stephen and the whole group will start off doing the waxes, and then they go through this process, and then they end up in the metal shop. And then that's where I then come back in and help do some of the metal work and the patina work. So, it's always a rotation of things that are going on. Any metal that we can recycle, we melt back down. And I just went through the bins yesterday trying to come up with some metal for the pour. And there are a few pieces. I said, well, let's just melt this one down. I don't want this. And of course, I've got the guys over there going, don't melt that down, I like it, we've done all that work. I'm going like, look, trust me, we don't want it, melt it. We get it from a smelter. I mean, we literally, which is probably Pennsylvania, but that would be my twin brother who does all the ordering and pays the bills. And so I'm not, I don't know, but we order from manufacturers, and we get ingots that are 25-pound blocks that we then take 4 or 5 of them and then melt down in a crucible and then pour them. So we rely on their expertise to send us the right material.